You've been standing at the door of your own life, knocking, asking if you're allowed to come in. The tragedy isn't that the door is locked. The tragedy is that it never was. You've been waiting for permission that was never required, seeking approval from people who have no authority over your destiny, asking for a signature on a document that doesn't exist. And while you've been waiting, life has been passing. Dreams have been aging. Purpose has been pacing back and forth in the hallway of your soul, wondering when you're finally going to stop asking and start walking. You weren't made to wait. You were made to move. But somewhere along the way, someone convinced you that movement without permission is rebellion. That stepping into your calling without a consensus is arrogance. That becoming who you were designed to be requires a committee meeting, a vote, a stamp of approval from people who don't even understand what you're carrying. And so you've been frozen. Not because you lack ability, not because you lack vision, but because you've been conditioned to believe that your life needs authorization from someone other than the one who authored it. Let me tell you what that waiting has cost you. It's cost you years. Years you can't get back. Years you spent rehearsing instead of performing. Years you spent preparing instead of building. Years you spent asking instead of acting. You've been in the waiting room so long you've started to believe it's the actual room. You've decorated it. You've gotten comfortable in it. You've convinced yourself that patience is the same thing as paralysis. But patience is active. Patience is preparation with expectation. What you've been doing isn't patience. It's fear dressed up in humility. It's doubt disguised as wisdom. It's the terror of failure wrapped in the language of timing. You've been telling yourself you're waiting for the right moment, but what you're really waiting for is a guarantee. You want someone to promise you it's going to work before you try. You want someone to assure you that you won't fail, you won't be rejected, you won't be criticized, you won't be alone. And because no one can give you that guarantee, you've stayed still. And that stillness has wounded you. It's created a deep, aching confusion inside you. You know you're made for something, but you can't seem to step into it. You feel the pull, but you can't find the permission. You hear the call, but you keep waiting for someone to validate it. And every time you ask and don't receive the answer you're looking for, it confirms the lie. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe I'm not worthy. Maybe I'm not called. Maybe I'm wrong. The rejection you've experienced from people who didn't see your vision has become the voice in your head that questions your legitimacy. The dismissal you receive from people who didn't understand your assignment has turned into self-doubt. The skepticism you encountered when you tried to share your dream has made you skeptical of the dream itself. And now you're trapped in this horrible cycle where you need validation to move. But you can't get validation until you move. And so you just stand there bleeding internally, watching other people live the life you were supposed to be building. You've spent so much energy trying to earn approval that you've forgotten what it feels like to simply be. You perform. You adjust. You shrink. You expand. You shapeshift depending on who's in the room, trying to become the version of yourself that will finally receive the nod, the affirmation, the green light. You've turned your life into an audition. Every conversation is a pitch. Every relationship is a potential endorsement. Every room you walk into is a stage where you're hoping someone will finally say, yes, you're allowed. You have permission. You can begin. But that moment never comes because the people you're asking don't have the authority to give it. They're not the manufacturer. They didn't design you. They don't know the blueprints. They're just other products on the shelf. And you're asking a hammer if you're allowed to be a screwdriver. You're asking people who are just as lost as you are to give you directions. You're asking people who are still waiting for permission themselves to authorize your movement. And the cruelest part of this trap is that some of the people you're waiting on don't want you to move. They need you to stay stuck. Your paralysis makes them feel better about their own. Your hesitation justifies their inaction. Your fear confirms their worldview. If you step out without permission, it exposes the fact that they could have done the same thing. If you move without approval, it reveals that approval was never the issue. And so they disguise their fear as concern. They package their limitations as wisdom. They call your courage recklessness. They call your faith foolishness. They tell you to wait, not because waiting is wise, but because your movement terrifies them. It disrupts the comfortable lie they've been living, the lie that says we're all stuck, we're all waiting, we're all powerless until someone in authority tells us we're not. But you're starting to see through it now. You're starting to realize that the waiting room is a trap, that the approval you've been seeking is a mirage, that the permission you've been chasing doesn't exist. You've wasted time, and that realization is crushing you. You look back at the years and you see a graveyard of almosts. Almost started, almost built, almost left, almost spoke, almost created, almost became. And now you're standing here, older, more tired, more wounded, wondering if it's too late, wondering if you missed your window, wondering if the door you were supposed to walk through has already closed. And the voice in your head is louder now. It's telling you that you should have moved when you were younger, braver, less afraid. It's telling you that you should have ignored the critics, trusted your gut, taken the risk. It's telling you that you were right all along, but you let other people talk you out of it. And now you're haunted by the ghost of the person you could have been if you had just stopped asking and started walking. But here's the truth that's about to shatter every chain you've been wearing. You never needed permission, not from your parents, not from your friends, not from your pastor, not from your boss, not from society, not from the people who rejected you, not from the people who didn't understand you, not from the people who told you to wait. The only person who ever had the authority to authorize your life was the one who gave it to you. And that authorization happened the moment you took your first breath. You were born approved. You were born cleared. You were born with internal permission to become exactly what you were designed to be. The manufacturer didn't put you on this earth and then tell you to wait for a focus group to decide if you're allowed to function. He built the function into you. He encoded the assignment into your DNA. He wired the purpose into your spirit. And then he released you, not into a waiting room, into a world that needs what you carry. The prison you've been in was never locked. You've been standing on the inside, rattling the bars, begging someone on the outside to find the key. But the whole time, the door was cracked open. The whole time you had the authority to walk out. You just didn't believe it. You didn't believe you were allowed to move without permission because you've been trained to distrust your own internal compass. You've been taught that your instincts are unreliable, that your desires are selfish, that your vision is delusional. You've been conditioned to seek external validation because internal authority feels dangerous. It feels arrogant. It feels rebellious. But it's not. It's alignment. It's obedience to the design. It's finally syncing up with the blueprint instead of constantly checking with people who've never even seen it. A lion cub doesn't schedule a meeting with the pride to ask if it's allowed to grow into a lion. It doesn't submit a proposal. It doesn't wait for a certification. The lion is already in the cub. The roar is already in the throat. The hunt is already in the instinct. What looks like growth is actually revelation. What looks like becoming is actually uncovering. The cub doesn't become a lion by asking permission. It becomes a lion by surviving, by learning, by failing, by getting back up, by obeying the internal code that was written before it ever opened its eyes. And here's what you need to understand. No one in the pride questions the cub's right to become what it already is. They don't vote on it. They don't debate it. They don't withhold approval until the cub proves itself worthy. The lion is expected. The transformation is guaranteed. The only variable is time and whether the cub will cooperate with its own nature or fight against it. You've been fighting against your own nature because you thought your nature needed permission to exist. There's a seed in the ground right now in total darkness, and it's doing something extraordinary. It's breaking itself open. It's splitting its own shell. It's reaching upward through soil it can't see through toward light it's never experienced, with zero evidence that this is going to work. And it doesn't ask the dirt for permission. It doesn't wait for the rocks to approve its path. It doesn't take a vote among the other seeds to see if growth is a good idea. It operates on internal authority. It was programmed before it was planted. The instructions are in the core. And so it pushes in silence, in darkness, in total isolation. No audience, no applause, no validation, just the relentless, quiet obedience to what it was made to do. And one day, without announcement, without permission, without anyone's approval, it breaks through the surface. And the world doesn't question its right to exist. The world doesn't ask for its credentials. The world just receives the tree. You've been that seed sitting in the soil, asking the darkness if you're allowed to grow. But the darkness doesn't grant permission. The darkness is just the environment. Growth is your decision. Here's the framework you've been missing. You are a product of a manufacturer, and every product is designed with a specific function. A hammer doesn't need permission from a screwdriver to be a hammer. A screwdriver doesn't need approval from a wrench to fulfill its design. Each tool has inherent authority to do what it was made to do. The confusion comes when you start asking other tools to validate your function. When you ask the hammer if you're allowed to turn screws. When you ask the screwdriver if you're allowed to pound nails. They're going to say no. Not because you're unauthorized, but because they don't understand your design. They can only see through the lens of their own function. And if you keep asking them, you're going to spend your entire life trying to be a hammer when you were built to be a screwdriver. You're going to waste your existence trying to earn approval from people who are fundamentally incapable of seeing what you were made for. The manufacturer gave you your function. He gave you your design. He gave you your authority. And he didn't consult with the other products before he released you. There was a craftsman who spent 15 years making blades. Beautiful blades, sharp blades, functional blades, but he never sold one, never gave one away, never used one. He just kept making them and then hiding them in his workshop, waiting for the day when someone with authority would walk in and tell him his work was legitimate. He was waiting for a master craftsman to inspect his blades and grant him the title of bladesmith. He thought he needed certification before he could call himself what he already was. And so his workshop filled up with masterpieces that no one ever saw. His skill increased, but his impact remained zero. Until one day, a fire broke out in the village. And in the chaos, someone ran into his workshop looking for something, anything, to cut through debris to save a trapped child. They grabbed one of his blades, and it worked. It cut. It saved. It functioned exactly as it was designed to. And in that moment, the craftsman realized something that broke him and freed him at the same time. His blades didn't need approval to be blades. They just needed to be used. He didn't need permission to be a bladesmith. He just needed to stop hiding his work. The authority was in the function, not in the title. The legitimacy was in the design, not in the recognition. You've been hiding your blades. You've been building in secret, creating in private, developing in the shadows, waiting for someone to walk in and tell you that you're allowed to be what you already are. But no one's coming. The validation you're waiting for isn't coming. The permission you're seeking doesn't exist. And while you wait, the world is burning. There are people trapped who need the tool you're carrying. There are problems that require the solution you've been building. There are lives that are waiting for the function you were designed to fulfill. But you're in the workshop, polishing your skills, perfecting your craft, asking the empty room if you're good enough yet. You are good enough. You've always been good enough. The question was never about worthiness. The question is about obedience. Are you going to obey the design, or are you going to keep negotiating with people who don't have authority over your assignment? There's an eagle standing at the edge of the nest. It's never flown before. It doesn't know if it can. And then the mother does something that looks cruel but is actually love. She pushes. She doesn't ask permission. She doesn't wait for the eaglet to feel ready. She doesn't conduct a survey to see if the eaglet has enough confidence. She pushes because she knows something the eaglet doesn't know yet. Flight isn't something you learn by thinking about it, something you discover by falling. The wings don't activate in the nest. They activate in the air. The instinct doesn't kick in when you're comfortable. It kicks in when you're in crisis. And so the eaglet falls. And in the terror of the fall, something ancient wakes up. Something that was always there but had never been needed until this moment. The wings spread. Not because of permission, not because of approval, but because of design. The eaglet was always an eagle. It just didn't know it until it was in the air. You've been standing at the edge of the nest asking if you're allowed to jump. But the question isn't about permission. The question is about trust. Do you trust the design? Do you trust that the wings are there even though you've never used them? Do you trust that the instinct will kick in even though you've never felt it? Here's the dangerous truth about waiting for permission. It becomes an addiction. It becomes a way to avoid responsibility. Because if you wait long enough, if you ask enough people, if you collect enough no's, eventually you get to say, well, I tried. I asked. They said no. It's not my fault. I didn't move. And that false comfort is killing you. You get to stay stuck and blame someone else for it. You get to play the victim of other people's limitations. You get to stay safe in the cage and point to the people who didn't open it for you. But here's what you're not admitting. You were never waiting for them to open it. You were waiting for them to give you permission to open it yourself. And when they didn't, you took that as proof that you shouldn't. But their silence wasn't instruction. Their hesitation wasn't wisdom. Their fear wasn't prophecy. It was just their fear. And you gave it authority over your life. The seasons of isolation you've experienced weren't punishment. They were preparation. You were being separated from the voices that would have talked you out of your assignment. You were being hidden from the people who would have infected your vision with their doubt. You were being placed in silence so you could finally hear the internal voice that's been drowned out by external noise your entire life. And in that silence, something was being built. Not for an audience, not for approval, but for function. The tree doesn't grow for applause. It grows because growth is what trees do. And the strongest trees, the ones with the deepest roots, the ones that survive the storms, are the ones that grew in silence. They didn't have a crowd cheering them on. They didn't have a support system affirming every inch of growth. They just had soil, water, sunlight, and time, and that was enough. Your silence has been enough. Your isolation has been enough. The lack of permission has actually been protection. Because if you had received approval too early, you would have built your identity on their affirmation instead of on your design. And when their approval shifted, your identity would have collapsed. Before I continue, answer one question honestly. Who gave you permission to wait? Who told you that your life needed someone else's signature to begin? Who convinced you that the calling inside you required a committee's approval before it could be obeyed? If you're still listening, something inside you is waking up. Something that's been asleep under layers of fear and false humility and people-pleasing and approval addiction. Something that's been quiet because it's been shouted down by voices that had no authority to silence it. And it's starting to remember. It's starting to remember that you were never unauthorized. You were just afraid. It's starting to remember that the door was never locked. You were just too polite to turn the handle. It's starting to remember that permission was never the issue. Courage was. You don't need permission to heal from what broke you. You don't need permission to walk away from what's killing you. You don't need permission to stop performing for people who will never be satisfied. You don't need permission to build what's been growing inside you for years. You don't need permission to become who you've always been underneath the masks. You don't need permission to forgive yourself for the time you lost. You don't need permission to start today instead of waiting for tomorrow. You don't need permission to trust your instincts when everyone else is telling you to doubt them. You don't need permission to take up space in rooms that try to shrink you. You don't need permission to speak truths that make comfortable people uncomfortable. You don't need permission to leave behind the version of yourself that everyone else loved but you couldn't stand. You don't need permission to stop asking for permission. The momentum is building now. Can you feel it? The chains are loosening. The fog is clearing. The voice that's been whispering wait is being drowned out by the voice that's been roaring now your entire life. You grow in silence. You heal in silence. You rise in silence. The transformation doesn't happen on stage. It happens in the hidden place where no one is watching, where no one is grading, where no one is giving feedback. It happens in the middle of the night when you're alone with your thoughts and you finally decide that their opinion matters less than your obedience. It happens in the moment when you stop defending your decisions to people who don't have your vision. It happens when you realize that explanation is a prison and you don't owe anyone the keys to your calling. The people who are meant to understand will understand. The people who aren't will create narratives that have nothing to do with you, and you're finally free enough to let them. Here's what happens when you stop waiting for permission. Clarity comes. Not all at once, not in a blinding flash, but in waves, in moments, in the middle of ordinary days when you're just doing what you know you're supposed to do. And suddenly you realize this is it, this is the thing. This is what I was made for. And it doesn't need anyone's stamp of approval because it's already producing fruit. It's already creating impact. It's already functioning exactly as designed. The proof isn't in the applause. The proof is in the function. The hammer doesn't need people to clap when it drives a nail. It just needs to drive the nail. And when you stop performing and start functioning, when you stop auditioning and start building, the validation you were chasing becomes irrelevant. You're not looking for approval anymore. You're looking for alignment. You're not asking if you're allowed. You're asking if this is obedience. And that shift changes everything. The isolation you experienced wasn't rejection. It was redirection. You were being pulled away from people who would have kept you small. You were being separated from voices that would have convinced you to stay safe. You were being hidden so you could be built without interference. And yes, it hurt. Yes, it was lonely. Yes, there were nights when you wondered if you were being punished. But you weren't being punished. You were being protected. Protected from the wrong partnerships that would have diluted your vision. Protected from the premature exposure that would have destroyed you before you were ready. Protected from the crowds that would have celebrated the wrong version of you. The silence was mercy. The isolation was kindness. The lack of permission was actually the greatest permission you could have received, permission to become without interruption. You're not the same person you were when you started waiting. The waiting changed you. It aged you. It wounded you. But it also prepared you. You know things now that you couldn't have known if someone had just handed you permission at the beginning. You know what it feels like to doubt yourself and keep moving anyway. You know what it costs to trust your internal compass when every external voice is telling you you're lost. You know the difference between people who support your assignment and people who just like the idea of you. You know that some doors close not because you're being rejected, but because you're being redirected to doors that actually lead somewhere. You know that the no's you received weren't stop signs. They were signs that you were asking the wrong people. And all of that knowing, all of that wisdom, all of that character that was forged in the waiting is about to make sense. Because you're not waiting anymore. The pottery doesn't get shaped by the people who walk by and comment on it. It gets shaped by the hands of the potter. And that shaping happens in private, in heat, in pressure, in the kiln where no one can see what's being formed. The spectators don't shape you. The opinions don't mold you. The approval seekers don't define you. You're being shaped by hands that have authority, hands that know the design, hands that see the finished product even when you're still in pieces. And those hands don't need permission from the crowd to do their work. They don't need a consensus. They don't need affirmation. They just need your surrender. They need you to stop fighting the process. They need you to stop asking the spectators if the potter knows what he's doing. The spectators don't know. They can't see. They're not in the kiln. They're just watching from the outside, making guesses, offering opinions that have no bearing on the work that's actually happening. When you finally stop asking and start acting, you're going to lose people. Let's be honest about that. You're going to lose people who only loved the version of you that needed them. You're going to lose people who were comfortable with your paralysis because it made them feel better about their own. You're going to lose people who mistook your waiting for loyalty, your hesitation for humility, your fear for wisdom, and when you move without their blessing, they're going to call it betrayal. They're going to say you changed. They're going to accuse you of arrogance, of recklessness, of forgetting where you came from. But here's the truth. You didn't change. You just stopped pretending. You didn't become arrogant. You just stopped shrinking. You didn't forget where you came from. You just refused to stay there. And the people who are upset aren't upset because you're wrong. They're upset because your movement exposes their stagnation. Your courage reveals their fear. Your obedience highlights their compromise. And instead of being inspired, they're threatened. But here's what also happens. You start attracting different people. People who don't need you to stay small to feel significant. People who aren't intimidated by your growth because they're growing too. People who understand that permission was never the point, obedience was. People who see your function and celebrate it instead of trying to correct it. People who were waiting for someone like you to move first so they could have permission to move too. And suddenly you realize you weren't just waiting for permission, you were someone else's permission. Your movement is authorization for someone who's been stuck in the same trap. Your courage is the green light someone else has been waiting for. Your story is the proof someone needs that it's possible to step out without a safety net and discover that you can fly. You weren't just breaking out of prison, you were showing others where the door is. The direction is clearer now. Not because someone gave it to you, but because you stopped asking people who don't know where you're going to tell you how to get there. You stopped consulting with people who've never been where you're headed. You stopped taking advice from people who are still lost themselves. And in the absence of all that noise, in the silence that follows the decision to stop seeking external permission, the internal compass starts working again. It was always there. It was always accurate. It was just being drowned out. And now that you've turned down the volume on everyone else's opinions, on everyone else's fears, on everyone else's limitations, you can finally hear it. And it's saying move. It's saying now. It's saying you were always allowed, you just didn't believe it. It's saying the door is open, the path is clear, the assignment is active. It's saying stop rehearsing and start performing. Stop preparing and start building. Stop asking and start walking. You're not going to feel ready. Let me tell you that right now. You're never going to wake up one day and feel completely prepared, fully confident, entirely certain that this is going to work. That feeling doesn't come before movement. It comes during movement. It comes after you've already jumped and you're in the air and the wings spread and you realize, oh, this is what I was made for. This is what all of that waiting was preparing me for. Not the permission, but the capacity. Not the approval, but the strength to move without it. You're stronger than you think. You're more prepared than you feel. You're more authorized than you've been told. And the only thing standing between you and the life you were meant to live is the decision to stop asking if you're allowed to live it. This is the moment. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when the conditions are perfect. Not when everyone agrees. Not when the fear goes away. Not when you have more money, more time, more support, more clarity. This is the moment when you decide that waiting ends and walking begins. This is the moment when you stop being a hostage to other people's opinions and start being obedient to the design that's been inside you since before you could speak. This is the moment when permission stops being the question and purpose becomes the answer. You're standing at a threshold right now. On one side is everything familiar, the waiting room, the comfort of blaming others for your stagnation, the safety of never risking failure because you never risked anything, the false humility of staying small and calling it wisdom. On the other side is everything you were made for, the calling, the assignment, the impact, the life that's been waiting for you to stop asking if you're allowed to live it. And here's what you need to understand about this threshold. No one is going to carry you across it. No one is going to push you. No one is going to validate your decision before you make it. This is the loneliest and most powerful moment of your life because it's the moment when you realize that authorization was never external. It was always internal. The manufacturer built it into you. The designer encoded it into your spirit. The moment you were born, you were cleared for takeoff. You've just been sitting on the runway for years, asking the passengers if you're allowed to fly. But passengers don't authorize pilots. Passengers don't give permission to captains. They just trust that the one flying the plane knows what they're doing. And you know what you're doing. You've always known. You've just been convinced that knowing wasn't enough, that you needed someone else to confirm it. But confirmation doesn't create truth. It just agrees with it. And the truth is, you were made for this. There's a cost to stepping into self-authority. Let's not sugarcoat it. You will be misunderstood. People will call your confidence arrogance. People will call your certainty delusion. People will call your movement rebellion. People who are still waiting for permission will be offended by the fact that you stopped asking. They'll say you're moving too fast, that you're being reckless, that you're going to regret this. And maybe you will make mistakes. Maybe you will fail. Maybe you will look foolish. But let me tell you what's more foolish. Dying with the song still in you. Reaching the end of your life and realizing you spent it in a waiting room, asking for permission that was never required, seeking approval from people who never had authority, performing for an audience that was never even watching. That's the real tragedy. Not the failure that comes from trying. The failure that comes from never trying because you were too afraid to move without a guarantee. You're going to walk alone before you walk with your tribe. That's part of the cost. The people who were supposed to go with you won't. The people you thought would support you will stay silent. The people you thought would celebrate you will criticize you. And for a season, you're going to feel like you made the wrong choice. You're going to look around and see emptiness where you expected community. You're going to feel the weight of your decision in a way you didn't anticipate. But that emptiness isn't evidence that you're wrong. It's evidence that you're moving. Stationary objects don't experience wind resistance. It's only when you start moving that you feel the pushback. It's only when you start walking that you realize how many people were comfortable with you standing still. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, there will be nights when you question everything. But those nights are building something in you that permission never could have built. Unshakable internal authority. The kind of authority that doesn't need external validation because it's rooted in something deeper than opinion. When you stop asking and start acting, clarity floods in. Not because the path becomes easier, but because you're finally on the path. You're no longer standing at the crossroads, paralyzed by options, waiting for a sign. You're moving. And movement creates clarity in a way that stillness never can. You start to see what works and what doesn't. You start to understand what's yours and what isn't. You start to recognize the difference between the voice of fear and the voice of wisdom. You start to trust your instincts because you're finally using them. And with every step, with every decision, with every moment that you choose obedience over approval, something inside you gets stronger. The muscle of self-trust gets built. The foundation of internal authority gets laid. And eventually, you stop looking back. You stop wondering what people think. You stop checking to see if you have permission because you're too busy building to care about the opinions of people who are still waiting. The right people will come. Not right away, not in the way you expect, but they will come. Because movement attracts movement. Courage attracts courage. People who are done waiting will find people who are done waiting. And when you connect with someone who's also operating from internal authority, who's also obeying their design, instead of seeking approval, the partnership is different. It's not needy. It's not codependent. It's not built on validation. It's built on mutual respect for each other's assignments. It's built on the understanding that you're not here to complete each other. You're here to complement each other. You're not here to give each other permission. You're here to sharpen each other's obedience. And those relationships, the ones that form after you've already started walking, are the ones that last because they're not built on your need for approval. They're built on your commitment to function. You will be called arrogant by people who are terrified of their own power. Let that sink in. The accusation of arrogance is almost always a projection. It's people who are afraid to step into their own authority, accusing you of having too much of yours. It's people who have been performing for approval their entire lives being offended by the fact that you stopped performing. It's people who need permission being triggered by your decision to stop asking. And you have to let them be offended. You have to let them misunderstand you. You have to let them create whatever narrative helps them sleep at night. Because if you stop to defend yourself to every person who calls you arrogant, you'll never move. If you pause to explain yourself to every person who doesn't understand your assignment, you'll spend your life translating instead of building. Some people will never get it, and that's okay. They're not supposed to. They're not your audience. They're not your tribe. They're just people who are still waiting, watching someone who stopped and it's making them uncomfortable. Here's the vision of what happens when you finally step into the authority you've always had. The momentum that builds is unstoppable. Not because you're forcing it, but because you're finally aligned with it. You're no longer swimming upstream, asking the current for permission to flow. You're flowing with the current, and it's carrying you faster than effort ever could. Doors that were closed start opening, not because you became worthy, but because you finally walked up to them. Opportunities that seemed impossible start appearing, not because you got lucky, but because you positioned yourself in the path of them. People who can help you start showing up, not because you marketed yourself better, but because you started operating in your function, and function attracts the right connections. Everything you thought required permission starts happening naturally because you stopped waiting for authorization and started walking in it. The freedom that comes from releasing the need for permission is indescribable. You stop performing. You stop pretending. You stop contorting yourself into shapes that fit other people's expectations. You stop code switching depending on who's in the room. You stop editing your dreams to make them palatable to people who don't have the vision to see them. You just exist fully, authentically, unapologetically. And some people love it, and some people hate it, and some people don't care. And all of that is fine because their response is no longer the determinant of your worth, your direction, or your movement. You're finally free from the prison of other people's perceptions. You're finally operating from the place you were always meant to operate from, internal alignment with external assignment. Permission was never the issue. Readiness was never the issue. Worthiness was never the issue. The issue was believing that someone else had authority over a life they didn't create, a calling they didn't give, a purpose they can't see. The issue was handing your power to people who didn't even ask for it, who didn't even want it, who were just as confused as you were, but you made them the gatekeepers of your destiny. The issue was waiting for a signature on a document that doesn't exist, for approval from a committee that was never convened, for permission from a source that has no jurisdiction over your assignment. And now you know, now you see, now you understand that the door was never locked, the path was never blocked, the permission was never withheld. You were always authorized, you were always cleared, you were always allowed, you just didn't believe it. And that belief, or lack of it, became your reality. But belief is changing now. Can you feel it? Something is shifting. Something is waking up. Something that's been dormant, buried, silenced is starting to stir. It's the part of you that never needed permission. The part of you that was born knowing. The part of you that's been pacing back and forth behind the bars of approval seeking, waiting for the moment when you'd finally realize the cage was never locked. That part is coming forward now. And it's not asking. It's not hesitating. It's not waiting for consensus. It's moving. And you can either move with it or get left behind watching the person you were supposed to become walk away without you. This is your moment. Not because the stars align, not because conditions are perfect, not because everyone believes in you, but because you're finally done waiting. You're done asking. You're done performing for permission that was never required. The waiting ends today. The walking begins now. And every step you take from this moment forward is a declaration: I was always authorized, I just forgot. I was always cleared, I just doubted. I was always allowed, I was just afraid. But fear doesn't get to drive anymore. Doubt doesn't get a vote anymore. Other people's opinions don't get to determine my direction anymore. I'm moving, not because I feel ready, but because I am ready. Because readiness isn't a feeling, it's a decision. And the decision is made. If this message spoke to your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. And if you want more messages that grow your soul, subscribe, because your journey has just begun. The door is open. The path is clear. The permission you've been waiting for is the permission you're giving yourself right now, in this moment, as you decide that waiting ends today. You were made for this. You've always been made for this. Now go be it.